The Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana. Introduction. It may be interesting to some persons to learn how it came about that Vatsyayana was first brought to light and translated into the English language. It happened thus. While translating with the pundits the Anunga Runga, or the Stage of Love, reference was frequently found to be made to one Vatsya. The sage Vatsya was of this opinion or of that opinion. The sage Vatsya said this, and so on. Naturally, questions were asked who the sage was, and the pundits replied that Vatsya was the author of the standard work on love in Sanskrit literature, that no Sanskrit library was complete without his work, and that it was most difficult now to obtain in its entire state. The copy of the manuscript obtained in Bombay was defective, and so the pundits wrote to Benares, Calcutta, and Jaipur for copies of the manuscript from Sanskrit libraries in those places. Copies having been obtained, they were then compared with each other, and with the aid of a commentary called Jayamangla, a revised copy of the entire manuscript was prepared, and from this copy the English translation was made. The following is the certificate of the chief pundit. The accompanying manuscript is corrected by me after comparing 4 different copies of the work. I had the assistance of a commentary called Jayamangla for correcting the portion in the first 5 parts, but found great difficulty in correcting the remaining portion, because, with the exception of one copy thereof which was tolerably correct, all the other copies I had were far too incorrect. However, I took that portion as correct in which the majority of the copies agreed with each other." End quote. The Aphorisms on Love, by Vatsyayana, contains about 1,250 slokas, or verses, and are divided into parts, parts into chapters, and chapters into paragraphs. The whole consists of 7 parts, 36 chapters, and 64 paragraphs. Hardly anything is known about the author. His real name is supposed to be Malanaga or Mrilyana, Vatsyayana being his family name. At the close of the work this is what he writes about himself. Quote, "After reading and considering the works of Babhravya and other ancient authors, and thinking over the meaning of the rules given by them, this treatise was composed, according to the precepts of the Holy Writ, for the benefit of the world, by Vatsyayana, while leading the life of a religious student at Benares, and wholly engaged in the contemplation of the Deity. This work is not to be used merely as an instrument for satisfying our desires. A person acquainted with the true principles of this science, who preserves his dharma, virtue or religious merit, his artha, worldly wealth, and his kama, pleasure or sensual gratification, and who has regard to the customs of the people, is sure to obtain the mastery over his senses. In short, an intelligent and knowing person attending to dharma and artha and also to kama, without becoming the slave of his passions, will obtain success in everything that he may do." End quote. It is impossible to fix the exact date either of the life of Vatsyayana or of his work. It is supposed that he must have lived between the 1st and the 6th centuries of the Christian era on the following grounds. He mentions that Satkarni Sritvahan, a king of Kuntal, killed Malayavati his wife with an instrument called Kartari, by striking her in the passion of love, and Vatsya quotes this case to warn people of the danger arising from some old customs of striking women when under the influence of this passion. Now this king of Kuntal is believed to have lived and reigned during the 1st century A.C., and consequently Vatsya must have lived after him. On the other hand, Virahamihira, in the 18th chapter of his Brihat Sanhita, treats of the science of love, and appears to have borrowed largely from Vatsyayana on the subject. Now Virahamihira is said to have lived during the 6th century A.D., and as Vatsya must have written his works previously, therefore not earlier than the 1st century A.C. and not later than the 6th century A.D., must be considered as the approximate date of his existence. On the text of the Aphorisms on Love, by Vatsyayana, only 2 commentaries have been found, one called Jayamangla or Sutra Bhashya, and the other Sutra Vritti. The date of the Jayamangla is fixed between the 10th and 13th centuries A.D., because while treating of the 64 arts an example is taken from the Kavya Prakashya, which was written about the 10th century A.D. Again, the copy of the commentary procured was evidently a transcript of a manuscript which once had a place in the library of a Chalukyan king named Vishaladeva, a fact elicited from the following sentence at the end of it. Quote, "Here ends the part relating to the art of love in the commentary on the Vatsyayana Kama Sutra, a copy from the library of the King of Kings, Vishaladeva, who was a powerful hero, as it were a second Arjuna, and head jewel of the Chalukya family." End quote. Now it is well known that this king ruled in Gujarat from 1244 to 1262 A.D. and founded a city called Visalnagur. The date, therefore, of the commentary is taken to be not earlier than the 10th and not later than the 13th century. The author of it is supposed to be one Yashodhara, the name given him by his preceptor being Indrapada. He seems to have written it during the time of affliction caused by his separation from a clever and shrewd woman. At least that is what he himself says at the end of each chapter. It is presumed that he called his work after the name of his absent mistress, or the word may have some connection with the meaning of her name. This commentary was most useful in explaining the true meaning of Vatsyayana, for the commentator appears to have had a considerable knowledge of the times of the older author, and gives in some places very minute information. This cannot be said of the other commentary, called Sutra Vritti, which was written about A.D. by Narsingh Shastri, a pupil of a Sarveshwar Shastri. The latter was a descendant of Bhaskar, and so also was our author, for at the conclusion of every part he calls himself Bhaskar Narsingh Shastra. He was induced to write the work by order of the learned Raja Vrijalala, while he was residing in Benares, but as to the merits of this commentary it does not deserve much commendation. In many cases the writer does not appear to have understood the meaning of the original author, and has changed the text in many places to fit in with his own explanations. A complete translation of the original work now follows. It has been prepared in complete accordance with the text of the manuscript, and is given, without further comments, as made from it. Part 1. The Vatsyayana Sutra. Introductory Preface. Salutation to Dharma, Artha, and Kama. In the beginning, the Lord of Beings created men and women, and in the form of commandments in 100,000 chapters laid down rules for regulating their existence with regard to Dharma, Artha, and Kama. Footnotes. Dharma is acquisition of religious merit and is fully described in Chapter 5, Volume 3 of Talboys Wheeler's History of India and in the Edicts of Asoka. Artha is acquisition of wealth and property, etc. Kama is love, pleasure, and sensual gratification. These three words are retained throughout in their original as technical terms. They may also be defined as virtue, wealth, and pleasure, the three things repeatedly spoken of in the laws of Manu. End footnote. Some of these commandments, namely those which treated of Dharma, were separately written by Swayambhu Manu. Those that related to Artha were compiled by Brihaspati, and those that referred to Kama were expounded by Nandi, the follower of Mahadeva, in 1,000 chapters. Now these Kama Sutra, aphorisms on love, written by Nandi in 1,000 chapters, were reproduced by Shivadakatu, the son of Udvalaka, in an abbreviated form in 500 chapters, and this work was again similarly reproduced in an abridged form, in 150 chapters, by Babhravya, an inhabitant of the Punchala, south of Delhi, country. These 150 chapters were then put together under 7 heads or parts named severally. First, Sadharana, general topics. Second, Samprayogika, embraces, etc. Third, Kenya Samprayuktaka, union of males and females. 4th, Parihigkarika, on one's own wife. 5th, Paradika, on the wives of other people. 6th, Vyasika, on courtesans. 7th, Alpamishadika, on the arts of seduction, tonic medicines, etc. The 6th part of this last work was separately expounded by Dattaka at the request of the public women of Pataliputra, which is Patna, and in the same way Charayana explained the first part of it. The remaining parts, that is, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 7th, were each separately expounded by Suvarnanabha, the 2nd part, Gotakumukha, 3rd part, Gonardiya, 4th part, Gonikaputra, 5th part, Kuchimara, 7th part, respectively. Thus the work being written in parts by different authors was almost unobtainable, and as the parts which were expounded by Dattaka and the others treated only of the particular branches of the subject to which each part related, and moreover as the original work of Babhravya was difficult to be mastered on account of its length, Vatsyayana, therefore, composed his work in a small volume as an abstract of the whole of the works of the above-named authors. Part 1, Chapter 1, being the Index to or contents of the work. Chapter 2 will be Observations on the three worldly attainments of virtue, wealth, and love. Chapter 3, on the study of the 64 arts. Chapter 4, on the arrangements of a house and household furniture, and about the daily life of a citizen, his companions, amusements, etc. Chapter 5, about classes of women fit and unfit for congress with the citizen, and of friends and messengers. Part 2, on sexual union. Chapter 1 will be kinds of union according to dimensions, force of desire, and time, and on the different kinds of love. Chapter 2, of the embrace. Chapter 3, on kissing. Chapter 4, on pressing or marking with the nails. Chapter 5, on biting, and the ways of love to be employed with regard to women of different countries. Chapter 6, on the various ways of lying down and the different kinds of congress. Chapter 7, on the various ways of striking and of the sounds appropriate to them. Chapter 8, about females acting the part of males. Chapter 9, on holding the lingam in the mouth. Chapter 10, how to begin and how to end the congress, different kinds of congress, and love quarrels. Part 3, about the acquisition of a wife. Chapter 1, observations on betrothal and marriage. Chapter 2, about creating confidence in the girl. Chapter 3, courtship and the manifestations of the feelings by outward signs and deeds. Chapter 4, on things to be done only by the man and the acquisition of the girl thereby, also what to be done by a girl to gain over a man and subject him to her. Chapter 5, on the different forms of marriage. Part 4, about a wife. Chapter 1, on the manner of living of a virtuous woman, and of her behavior during the absence of her husband. Chapter 2, on the conduct of the eldest wife towards the other wives of her husband, and of the younger wife towards the elder ones. Also on the conduct of a virgin widow remarried, of a wife disliked by her husband, of the women in the king's harem, and of a husband who has more than one wife. Part 5, about the wives of other people. Chapter 1, on the characteristics of men and women, and the reason why women reject the addresses of men, about men who have success with women, and about women who are easily gained over. Chapter 2, about making acquaintance with a woman, and of the efforts to gain her over. Chapter 3, examination of the state of a woman's mind. Chapter 4, the business of a go-between. Chapter 5, on the love of persons in authority with the wives of other people. Chapter 6, about the women of the royal harem and of the keeping of one's own wife. Part 6, about courtesans. Chapter 1. On the characteristics of men and women and the reason why women reject the addresses of men, about men who have success with women, and about women who are easily gained over. Chapter 2. Of a courtesan living with a man as his wife. Chapter 3. Of the means of getting money, of the signs of a lover who is beginning to be weary, and of the way to get rid of him. Chapter 4. About a reunion with a former lover. Chapter 5. Of different kinds of gain. Chapter 6. Of gains and losses, attendant gains and losses, and doubts, and lastly, the different kinds of courtesans. Part 7. On the means of attracting others to one's self. Chapter 1. On personal adornment, subjugating the hearts of others, and of tonic medicines. Chapter 2. Of the means of exciting desire, and of the ways of enlarging the lingam, miscellaneous experiments, and receipts. End of Part 1, Chapter 1. The Kama Sutra by Vatsyayana. Part 1, Chapter 2. On the acquisition of Dharma, Artha, and Kama. Man, the period of whose life is 100 years, should practice Dharma, Artha, and Kama at different times, and in such a manner that they may harmonize together and not clash in any way. He should acquire learning in his childhood, in his youth and middle age he should attend to Artha and Kama, and in his old age he should perform Dharma, and thus seek to gain moksha, i.e., release from further transmigration. Or, on account of the uncertainty of life, he may practice them at times when they are enjoined to be practiced. But one thing is to be noted. He should lead the life of a religious student until he finishes his education. Dharma is obedience to the command of the Shastra or holy writ of the Hindus to do certain things, such as the performance of sacrifices, which are not generally done because they do not belong to this world, and produce no visible effect, and not to do other things, such as eating meat, which is often done because it belongs to this world, and has visible effects. Dharma should be learnt from the Shruti, holy writ, and from those conversant with it. Artha is the acquisition of arts, land, gold, cattle, wealth, equipages and friends. It is further the protection of what is acquired, and the increase of what is protected. Artha should be learnt from the king's officers, and from merchants who may be versed in the ways of commerce. Kama is the enjoyment of appropriate objects by the 5 senses of hearing, feeling, seeing, tasting, and smelling, assisted by the mind together with the soul. The ingredient in this is a peculiar contact between the organ of sense and its object, and the consciousness of pleasure which arises from that contact is called Kama. Kama is to be learnt from the Kama Sutra, aphorisms on love, and from the practice of citizens. When all the 3, Dharma, Artha, and Kama, come together, the former is better than the one which follows it. That is, Dharma is better than Artha, and Artha is better than Kama. But Artha should be always first practiced by the king, for the livelihood of men is to be obtained from it only. Again, Kama being the occupation of public women, they should prefer it to the other 2, and these are exceptions to the general rule. Objection 1. Some learned men say that as Dharma is connected with things not belonging to this world, it is appropriately treated of in a book, and so also is Artha, because it is practiced only by the application of proper means, and a knowledge of those means can only be obtained by study and from books. But Kama being a thing which is practiced even by the brute creation, and which is to be found everywhere, does not want any work on the subject. Answer. This is not so. Sexual intercourse, being a thing dependent on man and woman, requires the application of proper means by them, and those means are to be learnt from the Kama Shastra. The non-application of proper means, which we see in the brute creation, is caused by their being unrestrained, and by the females among them only being fit for sexual intercourse at certain seasons and no more, and by their intercourse not being preceded by thought of any kind. Objection 2. The Lokayatikas say, religious ordinances should not be observed, for they bear a future fruit, and at the same time it is also doubtful whether they will bear any fruit at all. What foolish person will give away that which is in his own hands into the hands of another? Moreover, it is better to have a pigeon today than a peacock tomorrow, and a copper coin which we have the certainty of obtaining is better than a gold coin, the possession of which is doubtful. Footnote: these were certainly materialists who seemed to think that a bird in the hand was worth two in the bush. End of footnote. Answer: it is not so. First Holy Writ, which ordains the practice of Dharma, does not admit of a doubt. Second, sacrifices such as those made for the destruction of enemies, or for the fall of rain, are seen to bear fruit. Third, the sun, moon, stars, planets, and other heavenly bodies appear to work intentionally for the good of the world. Fourth, the existence of this world is effected by the observance of the rules respecting the four classes of men and their four stages of life. Footnote: among the Hindus, the four classes of men are the Brahmins or priestly class, the Kshutra or warlike class, the Vaishya or agricultural and mercantile class, and the Shudra or menial class. The four stages of life are: the life of a religious student, the life of a householder, the life of a hermit, and the life of a sannyasi or devotee. End of footnote. Fifth, we see that seed is thrown into the ground with the hope of future crops. Vatsyayana is therefore of opinion that the ordinances of religion must be obeyed. Objection 3. Those who believe that destiny is the prime mover of all things say, we should not exert ourselves to acquire wealth, for sometimes it is not acquired although we strive to get it, while at other times it comes to us of itself without any exertion on our part. Everything is therefore in the power of destiny, who is the lord of gain and loss, of success and defeat, of pleasure and pain. Thus we see that Bali was raised to the throne of Indra by destiny, and was also put down by the same power, and it is destiny only that can reinstate him. Footnote: Bali was a demon who had conquered Indra and gained his throne, and was afterwards overcome by Vishnu at the time of his fifth incarnation. End of footnote. Answer: it is not right to say so. As the acquisition of every object presupposes at all events some exertion on the part of man, the application of proper means may be said to be the cause of gaining all our ends, and this application of proper means being thus necessary, even where a thing is destined to happen, it follows that a person who does nothing will enjoy no happiness. Objection 4. Those who are inclined to think that artha is the chief object to be obtained argue thus: pleasures should not be sought for, because they are obstacles to the practice of dharma and artha, which are both superior to them, and are also disliked by meritorious persons. Pleasures also bring a man into distress, and into contact with low persons. They cause him to commit unrighteous deeds, and produce impurity in him. They make him regardless of the future, and encourage carelessness and levity. And lastly, they cause him to be disbelieved by all, received by none, and despised by everybody, including himself. It is notorious, moreover, that many men who have given themselves up to pleasure alone have been ruined along with their families and relations. Thus, King Dandyakya of the Bhoja dynasty carried off a Brahman's daughter with evil intent, and was eventually ruined and lost his kingdom. Indra, too, having violated the chastity of Ahalya, was made to suffer for it. Footnote: Dandyakya is said to have abducted from the forest the daughter of a Brahmin named Bhargava, and being cursed by the Brahmin, was buried with his kingdom under a shower of dust. The place was called after his name, the Dandakya forest, celebrated in the Ramayana but now unknown. Alhaya was the wife of the sage Gautama. Indra caused her to believe that he was Gautama, and thus enjoyed her. He was cursed by Gautama and subsequently afflicted with 1,000 ulcers on his body. End of footnote. In a like manner, the mighty Kichaka, who tried to seduce Draupadi, and Ravana, who attempted to gain over Sita, were punished for their crimes. These and many others fell by reason of their pleasures. Footnote. Kichaka was the brother-in-law of King Virata, with whom the Pandavas had taken refuge for 1 year. Kichaka was killed by Bhima, who assumed the disguise of Draupadi. For this story the Mahabharata should be referred to. The story of Ravana is told in the Ramayana, which with the Mahabharata form the two great epic poems of the Hindus. The latter was written by Vyasa, and the former by Valmiki. End of footnote. Answer. This objection cannot be sustained, for pleasures, being as necessary for the existence and well-being of the body as food, are consequently equally required. They are, moreover, the results of Dharma and Artha. Pleasures are, therefore, to be followed with moderation and caution. No one refrains from cooking food because there are beggars to ask for it, or from sowing seed because there are deer to destroy the corn when it is grown up. Thus a man practicing Dharma, Artha, and Kama enjoys happiness both in this world and in the world to come. The good perform those actions in which there is no fear as to what is to result from them in the next world, and in which there is no danger to their welfare. Any action which conduces to the practice of Dharma, Artha, and Kama together, or of any two, or even one of them, should be performed, but an action which conduces to the practice of one of them at the expense of the remaining two should not be performed. End of Part 1, Chapter 2. The Kama Sutra by Vatsyayana. Part 1, Chapter 3. On the Arts and Sciences to be Studied. Men should study the Kama Sutra and the arts and sciences subordinate thereto, in addition to the study of the arts and sciences contained in Dharma and Artha. Even young maids should study this Kama Sutra along with its arts and sciences before marriage, and after it they should continue to do so with the consent of their husbands. Here some learned men object, and say that females, not being allowed to study any science, should not study the Kama Sutra. But Vatsyayana is of opinion that this objection does not hold good, for women already know the practice of Kama Sutra, and that practice is derived from the Kama Shastra, or the science of Kama itself. Moreover, it is not only in this but in many other cases that though the practice of a science is known to all, only a few persons are acquainted with the rules and laws in which the science is based. Thus the yajnikas or sacrificers, though ignorant of grammar, make use of appropriate words when addressing the different deities, and do not know how these words are framed. Again, persons do the duties required of them on auspicious days, which are fixed by astrology, though they are not acquainted with the science of astrology. In a like manner, riders of horses and elephants train these animals without knowing the science of training animals, but from practice only. And similarly, the people of the most distant provinces obey the laws of the kingdom from practice, because there is a king over them, and without further reason. Footnote. The author wishes to prove that a great many things are done by people from practice and custom, without their being acquainted with the reason of things, or the laws on which they are based, and this is perfectly true. End footnote. And from experience we find that some women, such as daughters of princes and their ministers, and public women, are actually versed in the Kama Shastra. A female, therefore, should learn the Kama Shastra, or at least a part of it, by studying its practice from some confidential friend. She should study alone in private the 64 practices that form a part of the Kama Shastra. Her teacher should be one of the following persons, that is, the daughter of a nurse brought up with her and already married. Footnote. The proviso of being married applies to all the teachers. End footnote. Or a female friend who can be trusted in everything, or the sister of her mother, that is, her aunt, or an old female servant, or a female beggar who may have formerly lived in the family, or her own sister who can always be trusted. The following are the arts to be studied, together with the Kama Sutra. 1. Singing. 2. Playing on musical instruments. 3. Dancing. 4. Union of dancing, singing, and playing instrumental music. 5. Writing and drawing. 6. Tattooing. 7. Arraying and adorning an idol with rice and flowers. 8. Spreading and arraying beds or couches of flowers, or flowers upon the ground. 9. Coloring the teeth, garments, hair, nails, and bodies, that is, staining, dyeing, coloring, and painting the same. 10. Fixing stained glass into a floor. 11. The art of making beds and spreading out carpets and cushions for reclining. 12. Playing on musical glasses filled with water. 13. Storing and accumulating water in aqueducts, cisterns, and reservoirs. 14. Picture making, trimming, and decorating. 15. Stringing of rosaries, necklaces, garlands, and wreaths. 16. Binding of turbans and chaplets, and making crests and top knots of flowers. 17. Scenic representations, stage playing. 18. Art of making ear ornaments. 19. Art of preparing perfumes and odors. 20. Proper disposition of jewels and decorations, and adornment in dress. 21. Magic or sorcery. 22. Quickness of hand or manual skill. 23. Culinary art, that is, cooking and cookery. 24. Making lemonades, sherbets, acidulated drinks, and spirituous extracts with proper flavor and color. 25. Tailor's work and sewing. 26. Making parrots, flowers, tufts, tassels, bunches, bosses, knobs, etc. out of yarn or thread. 27. Solution of riddles, enigmas, covert speeches, verbal puzzles, and enigmatical questions. 28. A game which consisted in repeating verses, and as one person finished another person had to commence at once, repeating another verse, beginning with the same letter with which the last speaker's verse ended. Whoever failed to repeat was considered to have lost, and to be subject to pay a forfeit or stake of some kind. 29. The art of mimicry or imitation. 30. Reading, including chanting and intoning. 31. Study of sentences difficult to pronounce. It is played as a game chiefly by women and children, and consists of a difficult sentence being given, and when repeated quickly the words are often transposed or badly pronounced. 32. Practice with sword, single stick, quarterstaff, and bow and arrow. 33. Drawing inferences, reasoning, or inferring. 34. Carpentry, or the work of a carpenter. 35. Architecture, or the art of building. 36. Knowledge about gold and silver coins, and jewels and gems. 37. Chemistry and mineralogy. 38. Coloring jewels, gems, and beads. 39. Knowledge of mines and quarries. 40. Gardening, knowledge of treating the diseases of trees and plants, of nourishing them, and determining their ages. 41. Art of cockfighting, quail fighting, and ram fighting. 42. Art of teaching parrots and starlings to speak. 43. art of applying perfumed ointments to the body, and of dressing the hair with unguents and perfumes, and braiding it. 44. The art of understanding writing in cipher, and the writing of words in a peculiar way. 45. The art of speaking by changing the forms of words. It is of various kinds. Some speak by changing the beginning and end of words, others by adding unnecessary letters between every syllable of a word, and so on. 46. Knowledge of language and the vernacular dialects. 47. Art of making flower carriages. 48. Art of framing mystical diagrams, of addressing spells and charms, and binding armlets. 49. Mental exercises, such as completing stanzas or verses on receiving a part of them, or supplying 1, 2, or 3 lines when the remaining lines are given indiscriminately from different verses, so as to make the whole an entire verse with regard to its meaning, or arranging the words of a verse written irregularly by separating the vowel from the consonants, or leaving them out altogether, or putting into verse or prose sentences represented by signs or symbols. There are many other such exercises. 50. Composing poems. 51. Knowledge of dictionaries and vocabularies. 52. Knowledge of ways of changing and disguising the appearance of persons. 53. Knowledge of the art of changing the appearance of things, such as making cotton to appear as silk, coarse and common things to appear as fine and good. 54. Various ways of gambling. 55. Art of obtaining possession of the property of others by means of mantras or incantations. 56. Skill in youthful sports. 57. Knowledge of the rules of society, and of how to pay respects and compliments to others. 58. Knowledge of the art of war, of arms, of armies, etc. 59. Knowledge of gymnastics. 60. Art of knowing the character of a man from his features. 61. Knowledge of scanning or constructing verses. 62. Arithmetical recreations. 63. Making artificial flowers. 64. Making figures and images in clay. A public woman, endowed with a good disposition, beauty, and other winning qualities, and also versed in the above arts, obtains the name of a Ganika, or public woman of high quality, and receives a seat of honor in an assemblage of men. She is, moreover, always respected by the king, and praised by learned men, and her favor being sought for by all, she becomes an object of universal regard. The daughter of a king, too, as well as the daughter of a minister, being learned in the above arts, can make their husbands favorable to them, even though these may have thousands of other wives besides themselves. And in the same manner, if a wife becomes separated from her husband, and falls into distress, she can support herself easily, even in a foreign country, by means of her knowledge of these arts. Even the bare knowledge of them gives attractiveness to a woman, though the practice of them may be only possible or otherwise according to the circumstances of each case. A man who is versed in these arts, who is loquacious and acquainted with the arts of gallantry, gains very soon the hearts of women, even though he is only acquainted with them for a short time. Chapter 4. The Life of a Citizen. Footnote. This term would appear to apply generally to an inhabitant of Hindustan. It is not meant only for a dweller in a city, like the Latin urbanus as opposed to rusticus. End of footnote. Having thus acquired learning, a man, with the wealth that he may have gained by gift, conquest, purchase, deposit, or inheritance from his ancestors, should become a householder and pass the life of a citizen. Footnote. Gift is peculiar to a Brahmin, conquest to a Kshatra, while purchase, deposit, and other means of acquiring wealth belongs to the Vaishya. End of footnote. He should take a house in a city or large village, or in the vicinity of good men, or in a place which is the resort of many persons. This abode should be situated near some water, and divided into different compartments for different purposes. It should be surrounded by a garden, and also contain 2 rooms, an outer and an inner one. The inner room should be occupied by the females, while the outer room, balmy with rich perfumes, should contain a bed, soft, agreeable to the sight, covered with a clean white cloth, low in the middle part, having garlands and bunches of flowers upon it, and a canopy above it, and 2 pillows, one at the top and another at the bottom. Footnote: These should be natural garden flowers. End of footnote. There should be also a sort of couch besides, and at the head of this a sort of stool, on which should be placed the fragrant ointments for the night, as well as flowers, pots containing collyrium and other fragrant substances, things used for perfuming the mouth, and the bark of the common citron tree. Near the couch, on the ground, there should be a pot for spitting, a box containing ornaments, and also a lute hanging from a peg made of the tooth of an elephant, a board for drawing, a pot containing perfume, some books, and some garlands of the yellow amaranth flowers. Not far from the couch and on the ground there should be a round seat, a toy cart, and a board for playing with dice. Outside the outer room there should be cages of birds, and a separate place for spinning, carving, and such like diversions. Footnote: Birds such as quails, partridges, parrots, starlings, etc. End of footnote. In the garden there should be a whirling swing and a common swing, as also a bower of creepers covered with flowers, in which a raised parterre should be made for sitting. Now the householder, having got up in the morning and performed his necessary duties, footnote: The calls of nature always performed by the Hindus the first thing in the morning, end of footnote, should wash his teeth, apply a limited quantity of ointments and perfumes to his body, put some ornaments on his person and collyrium on his eyelids and below his eyes, color his lips with alaktaka, footnote, a color made from lac, end of footnote, and look at himself in the glass. Having then eaten betel leaves, and with other things that give fragrance to the mouth, he should perform his usual business. He should bathe daily, anoint his body with oil every other day, apply a lathering substance to his body every 3 days, footnote, this would act instead of soap, which was not introduced until the rule of the Mohammedans, end of footnote. Get his head, including face, shaved every 4 days, and the other parts of his body every 5 or 10 days. Footnote: 10 days are allowed when the hair is taken out with a pair of pincers. End of footnote. All these things should be done without fail, and the sweat of the armpits should also be removed. Meals should be taken in the forenoon, in the afternoon, and again at night, according to Charayana. After breakfast, parrots and other birds should be taught to speak, and the fighting of cocks, quails, and rams should follow. A limited time should be devoted to diversions with pithamardas, vitas, and vishtushakas. Footnote: These are characters generally introduced in the Hindu drama. Their characteristics will be explained further on. End of footnote. And then should be taken the midday sleep. Footnote: Noonday sleep is only allowed in summer when the nights are short. End of footnote. After this the householder, having put on his clothes and ornaments, should, during the afternoon, converse with his friends. In the evening there should be singing, and after that the householder, along with his friend, should await in his room, previously decorated and perfumed, the arrival of the woman that may be attached to him, or he may send a female messenger for her, or go for her himself. After her arrival at his house, he and his friend should welcome her, and entertain her with a loving and agreeable conversation. Thus end the duties of the day. The following are the things to be done occasionally as diversions or amusements. 1. Holding festivals in honor of different deities. Footnotes: These are very common in all parts of India. End of footnote. 2. Social gatherings of both sexes. 3. Drinking parties. 4. Picnics. 5. Other social diversions. Festivals. On some particular auspicious day, an assembly of citizens should be convened in the temple of Saraswati. Footnote. In the Asiatic Miscellany and in Sir W. Jones's works will be found a spirited hymn addressed to this goddess, who is adored as the patroness of the fine arts, especially of music and rhetoric, as the inventress of the Sanskrit language, etc., etc. She is the goddess of harmony, eloquence, and language, and is somewhat analogous to Minerva. For further information about her, see Edward Moore's Hindu Pantheon. End of footnote. There the skill of singers and of others who may have come recently to the town should be tested, and on the following day they should always be given some rewards. After that they may either be retained or dismissed, according as their performance are liked or not by the assembly. The members of the assembly should act in concert, both in times of distress as well as in times of prosperity, and it is also the duty of these citizens to show hospitality to strangers who may have come to the assembly. What is said above should be understood to apply to all the other festivals which may be held in honor of the different deities, according to the present rules. Social gatherings. When men of the same age, disposition, and talents, fond of the same diversions, and with the same degree of education, sit together in company with public women, or in an assembly of citizens, or at the abode of one among themselves, and engage in agreeable discourse with each other, such is called a sitting in company, or a social gathering. Footnote. The public women, or courtesans, Vatsya, of the early Hindus have often been compared with the hetera of the Greeks. The subject is dealt with at some length in H. Wilson's Select Specimens of the Theatre of the Hindus, in 2 volumes, Trubner and Company, 1871. It may be fairly considered that the courtesan was one of the elements, and an important element, too, of early Hindu society, and that her education and intellect were both superior to that of the women of the household. Wilson says, quote, "By the Vatsya or courtesan, however, we are not to understand a female who has disregarded the obligation of law, or the precepts of virtue, but a character reared by a state of manners unfriendly to the admission of wedded females into society, and opening it only at the expense of reputation to women who were trained for association with men by personal and mental acquirements to which the matron was a stranger." End of footnote. The subjects of discourse are to be the completion of verses half composed by others, and the testing the knowledge of one another in the various arts. The women who may be the most beautiful, who may like the same things that the men like, and who may have power to attract the minds of others, are here done homage to. Drinking parties. Men and women should drink in one another's houses, and here the men should cause the public women to drink, and should then drink themselves, liquors such as the madhu, araya, sara, and asawa, which are of bitter and sour taste, also drinks concocted from the barks of various trees, wild fruits, and leaves. Going to gardens or picnics. In the forenoon, men, having dressed themselves, should go to gardens on horseback, accompanied by public women and followed by servants, and having done there all the duties of the day, and passed the time in various agreeable diversions, such as the fighting of quails, cocks, and rams, and other spectacles, they should return home in the afternoon in the same manner, bringing with them bunches of flowers, etc. The same also applies to bathing in summer in water from which wicked or dangerous animals have previously been taken out, and which has been built in on all sides. Other social diversions. Spending nights playing with dice, going out on moonlight nights, keeping the festive day in honor of spring, plucking the sprouts and fruits of the mango trees, eating the fibers of lotuses, eating the tender ears of corn, picnicking in the forests when the trees get their new foliage, the Udakakashvedika, or sporting in the water, decorating each other with the flowers of some trees, pelting each other with the flowers of the kadamba tree, and many other sports which may either be known to the whole country or may be peculiar to particular parts of it. These and similar other amusements should always be carried on by citizens. The above amusements should be followed by a person who diverts himself alone in company with a courtesan, as well as by a courtesan who can do the same in company with her maidservants or with citizens. A Pithamarda is a man without wealth, alone in the world, whose only property consists of his malika, some lathering substance, and a red cloth, who comes from a good country, and who is skilled in all the arts, and by teaching these arts is received in the company of citizens, and in the abode of public women. Footnotes. According to this description, a Pithamarda would be a sort of professor of all the arts, and as such received as the friend and confidant of the citizens. The malika is a seat in the form of the letter T. End of footnotes. A Vita is a man who has enjoyed the pleasures of fortune, who is a compatriot of the citizens with whom he associates, who is possessed of the qualities of a householder, who has his wife with him, and who is honored in the assembly of citizens, and in the abodes of public women, and lives on their means and on them. Footnote. The Vita is supposed to represent somewhat the character of the parasite of the Greek comedy. It is possible that he was retained about the person of the wealthy, and dissipated as a kind of private instructor, as well as an entertaining companion. End of footnote. A Vidushaka, also called a Vahihasaka, that is, one who provokes laughter, is a person only acquainted with some of the arts who is a jester, and who is trusted by all. Footnote. Vidushaka is evidently the buffoon and jester. Wilson says of him that he is the humble companion, not the servant, of a prince or man of rank, and it is a curious peculiarity that he is always a Brahmin. He bears more affinity to Sancho Panza, perhaps, than any other character in Western fiction, imitating him in his combination of shrewdness and simplicity, his fondness of good living and his love of ease. In the dramas of intrigue he exhibits some of the talents of Mercury, but with less activity and ingenuity, and occasionally suffers by his interference. According to the technical definition of his attributes, he is to excite mirth by being ridiculous in person, age, and attire. End of footnote. These persons are employed in matters of quarrels and reconciliations between citizens and public women. This remark applies also to female beggars, to women with their heads shaved, to adulterous women, and to old public women skilled in all the various arts. Thus a citizen living in his town or village, respected by all, should call on the persons of his own caste who may be worth knowing. He should converse in company and gratify his friends by his society, and obliging others by his assistance in various matters, he should cause them to assist one another in the same way. There are some verses on this subject as follows. A citizen discoursing, not entirely in the Sanskrit language, nor wholly in the dialects of the country, on various topics in society, obtains great respect. Footnote. This means, it is presumed, that the citizen should be acquainted with several languages. The middle part of this paragraph might apply to the nihilists and Fenians of the day, or to secret societies. It was perhaps a reference to the thugs. End of footnote. The wise should not resort to a society disliked by the public, governed by no rules, and intent on the destruction of others. But a learned man living in a society which acts according to the wishes of the people, and which has pleasure for its only object, is highly respected in this world. End of chapters 3 and 4.